I'm Rosie Hardy. This is Rosie Hardy Gardening. This is going to be the late July Q&A. Just before I start, would like to thank everybody who has subscribed, been watching the videos and helped us to achieve over 10,000 subscriptions. It is fantastic. Thank you very much. My son would also like to say thank you as well. He's the one in the background doing all of the bits that I don't know how to do. Let's get on with it. Right. Hello, Rosie. I've been given a gallonia and it looks lovely. Unfortunately, the leaves are starting to turn black on the edges. Watered and fed it regularly in a largish pot, wanting to know what's causing it. My first reaction to this is I suspect you may have watered it too much and it is suffering from a soggy bottom. Best thing to do is tip it out of the pot, see how wet the compost is. If it is very wet and maybe smelling a little bit, then repot it, put it into some drier compost. Do not water it as much, let the rain get in, etc. Plus the fact at this time of the year, it will be starting to sort of die back down because it will be going into its autumn slightly earlier than other plants because it is a spring perennial. Hi Rosie, I bought a lupine last year, did perfectly well, looked really great and healthy at the beginning of the year, and then the dreaded lupine aphid came along. How can I stop this in future? Well, the lupine aphid, or Macrocephalum albifrons, has a white waxy coating over the top of it, which means that it is actually slightly already covered in an armour, which means that most sprays, don't really get through very well. But I am thinking that perhaps you don't want to spray. If you do, well, that's absolutely fine. If you don't, an easy way with them is to get a high power wash, your hose pipe, really high power. Wash them off the plant. Don't do it so hard that you kill the plant off, but wash them off. They fall off really, really easily. Then you can collect them up, kill them, just squash them. That's absolutely fine. This is not a one-off treatment. You will have to redo it because you won't get everything off there. But it is an easy way of doing it and quite effective without actually having to resort to any chemicals. I've just planted some lupine seeds in individual pots, germinated successfully. Fully expect these to be slug and snail fodder, which is very true. Is there any advice on what I can do to help mitigate this, such as straw or all bran? The best thing to put down around plants is good old-fashioned bran. And that is the cheapest, nastiest bran that you can buy. So from the shops, get the old, bran, and the dustier the better, to be honest, because it's that which their foot plate goes over and it absorbs all of the moisture out of them. And it is a very difficult thing for them to produce all that mucus. It costs them a lot of energy. And if you can dry that up, they won't go near your plants. But you will have to reapply because obviously the bran gets wet and then it's not going to work. So when it's dry, it's better. So you scatter a bit, they shouldn't get it. You scatter a bit more, absolutely fine. Hello Rosie, I'm struggling to get that densely planted cottage garden feel in my borders with the plants self-seeding and they smother each other. So with this, informality and that cottage garden feel takes a bit of work. It's not just leaving the plants to do it themselves. So this is where you have to do that editing. So if a plant is getting too big and smothering something else, cut back the arms that are causing that and then allow the other plants to come through. If something is self-seeding far too readily, thin out the seedlings. And it's a matter of watching, seeing, moving stuff around, and then if you've got the odd hole, you gap it up, you fill it with traditional old annuals or even vegetables. The good old cottage garden feel had vegetables growing in there, so flowering things like the beautiful red broad bean or even climbing beans. They all fit into that cottage garden style, so it's something that you have to edit. Rosie, Thalictrum once blooming or can they repeat bloom? The majority of thalictrums are one blooming period. So they bloom for a good length of time, then they get these fabulous seed heads, and then they die back down again. Occasionally some will have latent buds lower down the stems, which means that you can cut off the top head just as it finishes flowering and you get a little bit more. But that's not really a second blooming, that's just extending that blooming season. So it is one off. Hi Rosy, my roses have black spot and I'm told it's best to disinfect the secateurs as you go along to prevent spreading infection around. Any advice on how to do this and what products? Well, yes, keeping your tools that you're using, especially your cutting, so either snips or secateurs, clean when you're going out is really good. It's quite difficult to do disinfecting between each plant because you've got to allow the disinfectant to dry off, you've got to allow it to not be there as an interference for when you are then cutting another plant. So you can go to the extreme of having 2 or 3 pairs and they're all clean and you use one on one plant and then you clean them off and they go through. But having them clean to start off with is a good idea. And if you're going to clean them, just give them a normal soapy water like you would washing up water, soapy water, clean them off, let them dry off, give them a quick spray or a quick dip into a dilute disinfectant and then let them dry off completely. And then I would give them another little wash, because to be honest, you don't want that disinfectant going onto the plant because that can burn the edges of a plant. So you've got to be careful. You've just got to, if you suddenly find you've got a plant that's got a lot of disease, don't use those secateurs again for another plant because all you're doing is transferring it. So just be sensible with it. Right, hello, I live in US zone 8B. And that actually relates to a lot of the UK. So if people from the UK don't understand these zones, we are basically zone 8 or 9 in the UK. So wanting to know whether the varieties of plants and their names that I am highlighting change in the US to what they are in the United States. The answer to that is yes, they can. And what basically is happening is that a plant name that is named, say, in the UK, the name doesn't sometimes mean anything in the US. So it is changed and it's the selling name. So you'll still get Rudbeckia speciosa, but then you might get something else at the end of that, which is different in the UK to the USA. Just because it doesn't make sense. So for instance, our own gallonia, over here we called it St. Clements. In the US it was called oranges and lemons. So that is where you can get some differences. Hi Rosie, I have an Actieria simplex purpurea group, bought it this April, planted, south facing garden, though it only gets 3 hours of direct sunlight, as in a shady corner, soil is clay. Recently the leaves have started to go crispy brown at the edges. Now, this happens when they have a period of dry, and in June we had a very dry, hot spell, and I would suspect that your clay dried out. And that is when you are getting this crispiness on things. So even though they're in a shadyish bit and you think they're getting enough available water, when we get a dry spell, give them a bucket of water so that you don't get that crispiness. It's not going to change now. You can give them a bit of extra water now. That will help them with their flowering, but that crispy brown edge is not going to go now. That's not going to regrow. Hi, I'm wondering how I can revive my old but small Calacappa shrub. So Calacappa produce these beautiful purple berries. They are amazing. They're like purple pearls on the ends of a beautiful shrub through the winter months, and wondering whether or not they can cut it back a little bit, add compost, does it need, and what the timings. So when a shrub gets a little bit older, and especially Calacappa, they do respond very, very well to having quite a hard prune. However, if you do that hard prune, it will then not flower and produce berries in the following season, but the season after, because it produces flower and berry off 1-year-old wood. So what you can do is you can give them a little prune after flowering just to tidy up a shrub, or you can do half height pruning for part of the shrub, meaning that you will get a reduced amount on the other and then it will come back. Or you realise you are going to not get flower the following year, but it will improve what you get in that following season by giving it all of its stems down to half height. Somebody did a chip drop in 21, put 6 inches of chip down for no-dig flower beds, and I lost about 90% of the plants. Notice they're not growing well, has fertilised it this year, and the question is, was it too much wood chip, water not getting through? So if you put the chips on that deep, that is quite a depth of wood chip. Those chips need, and especially if they're quite fresh, need a lot of energy and nitrogen to actually break down. So they will have been absorbing everything they can out of the soil, therefore taking every nutrient away from the plants that you had in there. Also, if you put it down on dry ground, the water will not have permeated through until probably 2 years later. So if you are going to put that amount of chip down, you need to make sure that the soil is moist before you put it down, so that you're encasing the moisture into the soil. Also, I would suggest that was probably just a little bit too deep for that amount of chip, and you do need to feed every year afterwards because that wood chip is absorbing all of the nutrients. I have 4 Sapphire Indigo Clematis, want to transplant them to a better location. These are a shrubby sort of herbaceous type and want them in a better. Can I move them now? They are best moved when they are dormant. So I think for this season, you need to let them flower where they are, wait, and then once they've defoliated, you can lift them and move them. So that is through the dormant months, move them to where you want them, and then they will be fine. So this one, I've got a Watsonia. It's congested, looking a mess, many dead leaves, clumps 10 years old, lives in Southern Ireland, wants to know what to do with it. Now, if you have a Watsonia of that age, I would suggest that you need to be lifting and splitting it. It produces lots and lots of corms. And also you want to be cutting all of that dead stuff out. So basically when the flower stems has finished, you cut those right down to the ground. You do need snips. They are very thick, strong stems. When the leaves get brown in the season, give them a haircut as they do it. And then you don't get lots of brown in the bottom of the plant and you get the new green coming through. But with a plant that age, I would lift and split. Now you can either leave the main plant where it is and go around the edge and just take off corms, which is one way, or lift the whole thing, give yourself some nice big clumps and move it around the garden. This is the next one. I have a three bearded iris. They're not congested. Had them 3 years. They flowered beautifully before. This year they haven't done very well. I have to say this wasn't a good year for us for flowering of the iris, so probably not just you, but maybe they could do with a feed. I would suggest something like sulfate of potash to put on, and you can do that as a late summer autumn feed or in the spring, or both, whichever you want. But do read the rates of application. Don't over apply fertilizer, because otherwise if you do too much you can kill your plants rather than helping them. This is another one. I have herbaceous borders that I want to refresh and want to move my yellow Hypericum higcoat now. Now Hypericum higcoat is a really good grower. It's a strong growing plant. I would always say things are better moved when they're dormant, but because this is a toughie, yes, I would suggest you can. Just be aware though, if we suddenly get a hot period, make sure you're watering well once you have moved it, but you should be perfectly okay. Now the last one here is I have a small tree in a large container, lost the label, so unfortunately can't get another one, but it's doing really well. I regularly water and feed. Do I need to change the soil every few years? The answer to that is yes, it is a good idea to change the soil, lift them out, knock off old soil, give them a bit of new soil. That will absolutely help. What other trees can I put into a container? I don't want aces or olive, prefer blossom or fruit. Well, there are quite a lot of small growing trees that do incredibly well in large containers. Amelanchier lamarckii looks fabulous. Malus transitoria. Prunus subtilarilla autumnalis rosea, that is a lovely one. And then any of the dwarf malus or dwarf apples, Usually they're on dwarfing rootstocks of M26 or M27, lots of those, and then you get your own apple fruits as well. Hopefully this has helped people. Do please keep sending in questions. We do enjoy doing these Q&As. The next one will be at the beginning part of August. Thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel.